Ladies and gentlemen, there is a lot of activity going on in Minnesota today. It started right before the holidays, maybe I would say years. Well, it started in 2025 in terms of discovering all this fraud. First, it was fraud of COVID-19 funding from the federal government, and then it the investigation started to focus on fraud within the state of Minnesota itself. And so we started off with discovering $1 billion dollars worth of fraud. And that was just looking at the COVID money. It, a week and a half later, after the $1 billion discovery, um, the total fraud discovered a week and a half later was $9 billion. So a balloon from 1 billion to $9 billion in fraud. And, folks got arrested, folks got convicted, tried and convicted. They got their due process. At least six of these guys are heading to prison or face being deported. I hope that we continue to pursue fraud and hold accountable, whatever that looks like, depending on the severity of the fraud. We want to see accountability. We want to see people perk walked. We want to see folks thrown in prison or severely fined, depending on the severity of the crime. And so I want to keep my eye on the fraud in Minnesota. Don't worry about the new shiny object that's happening over here and over there. Follow the money. In every mystery book, crime movie that I've ever saw, the investigators have basically told the audience and the other characters co-acting in whatever movie or book I read about financial crime. The advice was always follow the money. And so that's what we are going to do at the Gregory Wright Show. Really appreciate you for tuning in. We're going to get into this Breitbart article that I stumbled across this morning. And hey, did you know that there was a U.S. congressional hearing on the fraud in Minnesota that took place yesterday, January 7th, 2026? Did you know that a hearing occurred in D.C. on this fraud? You have state representatives that are Republicans that blew the whistle and alerted um, officials handling this type of funding that there was potential fraud, or it can be proven that there were fraud cases or instances of fraud. But those complaints laid on deaf ears, and now we are where we are with this. And so this article details some of what took place, the discussions that were had, or the testimony that was given. It shares some of that in this article, and it's pretty eye opening. It's almost like you have everything is upside down today. You know, what used to be good is bad, what used to be bad is good today. So you'll get a sense of that as I read through the article that um, leadership at the Department of Human Services in Minnesota, leadership condemned, punished, surveilled honest people who were looking at the books, who were looking at the numbers and said, hey, something is fishy here. So, as a good state employee, they went to their supervisors and told them what they found. And they were silenced by the leadership at DHS in Minnesota. And you'll hear a little bit of that in this article, which is the reason why I want to share it with you. You can do three free things for me. You can like, share, and subscribe this video so we can break the YouTube algorithm to spread this word to people who would not otherwise get the information. Because you know the mainstream media, they are hell bent on misinformation and disinformation because mainstream media is the propaganda arm of the Democratic Party. And so we really can't trust these local news stations because they're just satellite little operating centers or little broadcasting operating apparatus. They're not even, they're barely a dot on the radar in the larger national syndicated and worldwide point of view when it comes to the mainstream media. The mainstream media is worldwide. It's not just on a national level. And so the severity and the potency and the iron grip that mainstream media has on its audience, even at the most localist level that you can think of. Like if you're in a town and your town can only get two channels, one of those channels is going to have some type of local news that's feeding into that community and doing a psychological operation on you. What do I mean about psychological operations? Operations means that those who are conducting the operation on its subjects, the subjects meaning us, unsuspected public, people, hardworking Americans that go to work every day, that send their kids to school every day at the bus stop and everything like that. We pay our taxes, we pay our bills, and just unbeknownst to us, we're being brainwashed by ideology and emotion and um, rage porn. I said rage porn, meaning that rage is addictive, just like um, I hear porn could be. And so it's perfectly safe and perfectly appropriate to make that analogy because that's what's going on right now. I mean, the protests that happen on a regular routine basis, those guys are getting paid to be there. There's no way that an issue just happened like hours ago and then hours later they have like what looks like um professionally made signs, no scribble, no fat magic marker, no unperfect written word. You see a few of those types of signs out there, but not too much. Most of them are professionally made. So is this all planned? Is this, there's a certain, you know, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole and, there's definitely a lot for us to talk about, but I want to keep my eye on the money because when you keep your eye on the money and you follow the money, that's where, that's the trail. Just the same way if you use your card, if you travel from North Carolina to New York and you use your card, your debit card or your credit card along the way, they could pull those records and look at your tendencies. When you follow the money, you know you can glean the tendency. You can glean the motive or the means by which a person or a group of people uh, achieve that goal and that motive. And so when you follow the money, you get to the reason, you get to the criminal and most of the reason why it occurred in the first place. Or you can at least prove that the person was involved with nefarious action when it comes to, taxpayer dollars or any type of dollars. Keep your eye on the money. Follow the money. You could look at a month's worth of any person's bank statements, checking account primarily, if that's the primary way of paying for whatever you buy. That's not big ticket. You can get a good sense of a person's character just by looking at a month's worth of bank statements on any given individual. So just imagine, 6 months worth. Just imagine a year's worth. Just imagine, 3 years worth. I mean, that's forensic evidence of a person deliberately doing something that, if you spot a negative pattern or a pattern that supports your overall theory on whether or not a person is capable of committing a certain crime or going down a certain route, look at financial records. So there's nothing that is going to stop the Gregory Wright show from following the money, despite distractions that took place as recently as yesterday in Minnesota. And so I'm not going to mention anything beyond that. I'm just going to get into the article. So don't worry if you can't see the entire article. I provided the link to the article in my comment section. So if the link in my comment section isn't clickable, just highlight the whole URL and open a new internet window and plug the URL up here and then press enter and you should be able to get it right. So this article was dated yesterday, and the title of it is Minnesota Democrats Block Auditors from Tackling Avalanche of Somali Fraud, Blacklisted Whistleblowers, right? And here's I'm not sure why this picture is up here. Maybe this is a protest in some state building or something. Not sure. The Somali dominated Democratic political machine in Minnesota successfully silenced hundreds of government experts who tracked the huge flow of taxpayer funds through Somali run businesses, a top Minnesota Republican told a House hearing on Wednesday, which was yesterday, January 7th, 2026. Up to 1,000 government auditors, accountants, and program managers were silenced by Democratic threats, Minnesota House Representative Marion Rorick told a House hearing in D.C. The most the most severe ones was that they would be fired with cause, so they couldn't have unemployment insurance, that they will be blacklisted from all state agencies, including Hennepin County, Ramsey County. As you know, those are Democratic run. So, on top of those two counties that were listed, as being Democratic run, they're probably one or two of your largest counties in Minnesota. So, if you're blacklisted, you're screwed as a government worker, and then you have to rely on the private sector to hire you. Many government experts, non government professionals, and Republicans detected many of the frauds, but their voices were muffled by Democrats who were allied with Somalian political machine in the state. They don't want a fraud unit to do anything. They want a fraud unit only on paper. Steve Halicki, a Minnesota fraud investigator, told a TV station in 2015. That's 11 years ago. This is how long this thing's been going on, probably longer than that. And Minnesota is not the only state, I reckon. In 2023, state employees formed an anonymous an anonymous group, excuse me, on Twitter to report the fraud to the public. We are over 480 Minnesota state staff serving with pride and commitment to our people and state. We strive for a better Minnesota free of fraud, right? On January 7th, which was yesterday, the group declared, we've been yelling from every rooftop possible about fraud. Few understood or listened to the scale of the problem. Systemic issues mean that someone in leadership is advising or forcing staff to commit wrongdoing. And these leaders will be named. Journalist clout in Minneapolis has also been shattered by the political and economic power of the Somali migrants. The result is that local politicians and cops were able to ignore multiple articles and TV segments about blatant fraud by many Somali businesses. Citizens' complaints were also suppressed by the political power of the clannish Somali groups and the local Democratic Party. Here's a post related to the subject at hand. Shout out to I Mean, Therefore I Am, who posted this. Right? Breaking. Man who previously lived in Minnesota has admitted to benefiting from Somali linked healthcare fraud. He says that about 15 years ago, while struggling with drug addiction, he was enrolled in taxpayer funded Minnesota Care. And we're just going to go to X and read the rest of it, right? Because that's what that's where it took me, right? Uh, Minnesota Care. As part of the program, he received free transportation to a methadone clinic. According to his account, the drivers, whom he says were Somali, required him to sign off on fake medical appointments and then pay them cash at the end of each month. He admits he did not question the fraud at the time, saying he was a junkie and did not care. That's being honest, since the money ultimately went towards buying more drugs. He claims this type of fraud has been ongoing for over a decade. Longer than that, brother. Longer than that. Let's get into some of the video real quick. Uh, put the cup down.
This video might not get any views, but whatever. I don't fucking care. Once upon a time, I used to live in this warm, lovely state called Minnesota. And within Minnesota, I was put on Minnesota Care, Minnesota Medicaid. And that Medicaid would pay for my methadone clinic. Not only did they pay for my methadone clinic, it paid for the medical taxi that I took to and from said clinic. Those taxi drivers were all Somalian. I was an addict. I didn't give a shit what was going on. But those Somalian taxi drivers used to have me write fake medical appointments, and they would pay me cash at the end of every month. I was a junkie. I didn't give a shit. So about 15 years ago, those medical rides, taxis, were driven by Somalians. They would be frauding my Minnesota Medicaid by me writing fake appointments. And what would I do? I would go to the dope man and put it into a needle and shoot it into my arm. So, do whatever you want with that information. But let's be honest, this Somali fraud that's going on, it's not new. It's been happening for quite some time. I'd say, I got about coming up on 11 years clean now. So the fraud that has been happening has been going on for a very long time. I'd say I started getting paid out by them motherfuckers probably like 13, 14 years ago. Do whatever you want to do with this information, but the medical scams, the fraud has been happening for a very long time.
All right, so you saw that, right? Let's get back to the article. Um, their collective message has been completely consistent, Rarick told the House committee when describing the X group of government professionals and experts. So these group of whistleblowers from Minnesota's Department of Health and Human Services who discovered this fraud decades ago, or at least a handful of years ago. Um, they are hell bent on bringing the truth to the American public, and so what did they do? They went on X and formed a anonymous group. I don't know what the group name is, but I'm pretty sure that if you type in Minnesota fraud when you go to X, um, I'm not attesting to the quality of the information that you'll find from this group, but if it's in depth and it looks technical and it looks thorough instead of a repost or one page or whatever, when you start read through the information, you're going to discern um, using your gut what's real and what's not, and or what seems to be closer to the truth and what's not. And so I plan on doing another deep dive, an additional video to the one I'm doing tonight, so I can deep dive into some of the numbers and maybe get down to the bottom of who might be this anonymous group of whistleblowers from the state of Minnesota. Okay, this is coming from um, Minnesota Republican representative from um, Minnesota Congress, right? He's saying instead of focusing on fraudsters, the Minnesota Department of Human Services leadership focused its surveillance on their own employees. Since January 2025, their expressed fear of retaliation has intensified under an avalanche of fraud in Minnesota. Their numbers have grown from 480 DHS employees, both current and former, to over 1,000 across multiple state agencies. They have told me repeatedly how grateful they are to the House Fraud Prevention Committee for focusing our attention on fraud in the state programs, using their inside information while keeping them completely protected. They have explained that they live in a constant state of fear of retaliation. One only has to look at what happened to Faye Bernstein to understand why. In a very recent Newsweek article dated December 13th of 2025, Ms. Bernstein, a former compliance specialist, stated Minnesota DHS functions in the opposite manner. Employees who suggest improvements or, heaven forbid, report fraud, then face significant retaliation. The messenger is shot. In 2019, Bernstein says she alerted Minnesota DHS officials to sloppy contracting practices that were not legally compliant, but it's not what most people would even consider fraud. She says she was later escorted out of the building, faced lengthy investigations, got trespassed from all DHS owned and leased properties, and received an involuntary transfer to another agency. So she says, so today, if somebody asks me, should I report fraud within DHS? I say, no, 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 no. It's career suicide plus a whole lot more. If you click on the link that I provided you to this article, you'll come across this video. I mean, like I said, the oversight committee at the U.S. Congress in D.C. executed a committee hearing yesterday, 7 January 2026, and the video is like 7 8 hours, right? Of course, there's a lot of fluff in there, but I'd say the hearing took at least 3 or 4 hours. So if you click on the link that I provided in the comments or in the description below, you were able to get to this article and then scroll down. And if at your leisure, if you want to watch a 7 hour video on this congressional committee hearing, then have at it. Right. So the Republican from Minnesota, who is a representative of the Minnesota Congress, Rarick, and a former accountant, continued his statement to the Congressional Committee. In our face to face meetings with the X group of whistleblowers, they revealed that workplace retaliation now includes threats of being fired with cause, which means you do not get unemployment insurance in the state of Minnesota. Isn't that wicked? Being blacklisted from all state agencies, more wicked. And I would note, most likely our largest counties as well, which are Democrat run. So they're basically canceled as government professionals. And then there was a veiled threat to use, uh, and then there was a veiled threat of the use of military intelligence against them. Uh-oh, they're going to start bugging their phones and recording their conversations, which they probably already have, allegedly. They later informed me that it was discovered that in some targeted employees or suspected whistleblowers' personnel files were pictures of their homes and their cars. So there's some whistleblowers that came out and said, hey, employees that were targeted because they discovered fraud within the Minnesotan Department of Health and Human Services, leadership of the Minnesotan Department of Human Services chose to punish the whistleblowers by surveilling them and firing them and reassigning them, blacklisting them, having them on the trespass list for every Minnesotan government agency in across multiple counties. If that's not being canceled, I don't know what is. But then it's on another level when it's reported allegedly that the leadership that was targeting certain employees, their own employees within the same department, they had pictures of their homes and their cars. Can you believe that? That's crazy. They also described that supervisors asked them questions about their families that to them felt like a threat. One example was, we need to know where your kids go to school and where their bus stops are. Wow. I will also note that whistleblowers we spoke to described many times DHS using surveillance programs to surveil employees' emails and chat and other communications, looking for keywords like fraud, double billing, underspending, and overpayments. If the DHS from Minnesota, the key leadership within the Department of Human Services within Minnesota, if the leadership is doing this to its employees when their employees are trying to do their job, these people are complicit. They're complicit in the fraud. They're complicit in the fraud, right? One example that the whistleblowers let me know about comes from Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. On April 12, 2024, Flanagan comes to a DHS Health and Human Services Equity Conference at the Heritage Center and Brooklyn Center in Minneapolis. On stage, Flanagan acknowledged the X account and the fraud concerns it raised, but publicly denounced the ex government whistleblowers and called them weirdos and losers sitting in their mother's basement. Wow. Lieutenant Governor of Minnesota, you're complicit. This was in a public setting with hundreds of participants and elicited gas among the crowd. Like, wow, she said that. Governor Tim Walz absolutely knew about the massive embezzlement and theft by the Somali run business, Rorick said. Those are Rorick's words. If those are my words, I will put allegedly behind it. So, hey, here's a an ex post from U.S. House of Representatives Anna Paulina Luna, right? Anna Paulina Luna, what a name! And she writes, based on testimony today, I have enough evidence to believe that both Tim Walz and Keith Ellison, who's the AG of the state of Minnesota, I believe, were knowingly complicit in a Somali fraud scheme in Minnesota. Therefore, I have referred them both to the Department of Justice for criminal charges. May justice be swift. The American people are tired. And we'll go to X, read the whole thing. The American people are tired of being taken advantage of. And here's a little bit of what she had to say in the matter.
Chair recognizes Ms. Luna.
Thank you, Chairman Comer. Honorable Robbins, based on your record before your committee, when did Governor Walz first become aware of widespread fraud in Minnesota social service programs?
I would assume that he has been aware of it since he ran for office for governor in 2018.
By 2017, DHS investigators warned CCAP fraud could exceed 50%. What was that information elevated to the governor's office?
Yes, there was an OLA report.
Thank you, ma'am. By 2020, state officials knew feeding our future invoices were fraudulent. We know that payments continued to the AG's knowledge. Did they continue to the governor's knowledge as well?
Yes.
Attorney General Ellison agreed on tape to fight Minnesota's own Department of Human and Health Services in exchange for Somali political and financial support. In your personal opinion, do you believe it is a possibility that Governor Walz also made that personal deal, or that he at least knew about the Attorney General's agreement?
I don't know.
Okay. I don't want to rehash what you guys have spent hours answering. We know that there's a big issue with the fraud in Minnesota. So on a number of things, I'd first like to point out, thank you for being here today, but because of your testimony and because of some of the evidence that we've seen brought forward, as well as I'm sure the fact that this committee, I assume, at Chairman Comer's direction, will be soon subpoenaing AG Ellison, I would like to make criminal referrals regarding Governor Walz as well as AG Ellison. As you know, U.S. Code 371 and U.S. Code 2, which deals with criminalized conspiracies to defraud the United States and establishes liability for individuals who knowingly aid or abet the commission of federal offense, includes willful blindness or deliberate inaction where duties to act exist. So I will be referring them later on today.
All right, so they heard that. Let's get back to the article, right? Let's get back to the article. The Minnesota, right? So, 1 2 1 2. Can you hear me? All right, good to go. The Minnesota defeat of the Democratic leaning government experts follows the nationwide subordination of American tech professionals to the imported army of mixed skilled Indian migrants. That sentence should have been taken out because it didn't make any sense to me. But the same process is underway in the nation's accounting sector, where older American partners are boosting their profits by replacing American accounting professionals with mixed skilled Indian graduates. Wow, that's a bold statement right there, with no footnote or nothing to it. Um, you're basically you're basically saying that because a person is Indian, doesn't have the same skills, or somehow the Indian graduate skills are somehow degraded compared to American ones. But we'll continue. I am not saying that. I'm just reading this article verbatim. Similarly, compliant foreign doctors and nurses are being hired by hospital chains in place of American professionals. We'll get into the reasons why. The replacement of outspoken, I will read that again because as Americans, we tend to be outspoken. And if you're an outspoken person, hey, don't change. Even if that means you get fired or furloughed or whatever the case is. I mean, you got to draw the line somewhere. You got to know where to fight your battles. But everything that comes up is not an emergency. Everything that comes up is not urgent. So, you just got to triage the information that you're faced with, and act accordingly, right? But the replacement of outspoken American professionals by compliant imported workers is a huge loss for ordinary Americans, technology, and innovation. The imported replacements have little or no legal authority to argue with their bosses, partly because many of the migrants must work for years before they can get green cards and then citizenship. Huh? Get the picture? Right? That's the reason why employers would rather hire mixed skilled Indians, because those mixed skilled Indians are looking for longevity within the United States, right? The result is that employers are freer to sideline the remaining American professionals who want to spotlight problems for the public, such as embezzlement of taxpayer funds, safety flaws in products, or security threats to citizens' private data and online funds. I don't know how long this daggone video is, but here is breaking from Eric Doherty, right? Shout out to him for creating this content, and I am blessed to share it with you. And he says it was just confirmed before Congress that 1,000 credible Minnesota whistleblowers, including Democrat employees of Tim Walz, balls to the walls, right? Or running an account on Elon Musk's X. They were ignored and intimidated, so they used the power of X. And X is very, very powerful. Expose it all. says Eric Doherty. Let's get into the video right here.
Working on this issue for years. You've spoken to the whistleblowers personally. Is that correct?
That is correct.
You have an understanding that 1,000 whistleblowers running an account on X have come forward to expose fraud in Minnesota state agencies, and they have been entirely ignored by Tim Walz and have even been retaliated against. Is that accurate?
That is correct. Even this morning, I got another message.
Well, in your experience, are their claims credible or are they politically motivated against Walz?
They're completely credible, not politically motivated.
In fact, many of these are Walz administration employees, correct?
They are actually Democrats as well.
Can you quickly give us one example of the retaliation these folks have been facing?
Yes, I can. In my opening statement, I mentioned that the most severe ones was that they would be fired with cause, so they couldn't have unemployment insurance, that they would be blacklisted from all state agencies, and I bet that it's also Hennepin County and Ramsey County, as you know, those are Democrat-run, and much, much more.
Based on what you've learned, Representative, over the last several years, do you have any doubt that Governor Tim Walz knew about this fraud as it was occurring?
He absolutely knew that it was occurring.
Wow, that's crazy, right? And she is Rorick. She's a Republican representative within the Minnesotan Congress. So there you have it, my friends. Wrapped it up. There's no more to read, and we're gonna wrap it up, baby. So I just want to summarize what we went over, right? So there's a lot going on in Minnesota. I choose to follow the money instead of the next shiny object over here, which was um, the tragic ICE shooting that took place yesterday. And so I will do a deep dive, separate video on that, on the legality of the whole situation. But tonight, I wanted the Gregory Wright Show to focus on the money and follow the money so we could see who the criminals are, where they are, and what their tendencies are by looking at doing a forensic view of the transaction patterns. Um, and based on what we see from those patterns, we will be able to make some judgment calls or some reach some conclusions about what actually happened, who actually did it, where it happened, when it happened, because most of these transactions are timestamped. And so um, I'm taking 45 minutes to run this video because the mainstream media is not going to cover it. They're going to focus on the tragedy that happened yesterday to get everybody distracted from following the money. But in every crime movie that I've ever watched, the advice is always to follow the money because that's where you get your information and that's where you get a whole lot of motivation and motive, so we can charge our jets to start to arrest, try, and convict fraudsters in Minnesota. I really appreciate your patronage, and I'll catch you on the next video. Thank you.